Jake wasn't supposed to stop. He was only there to drop off some old blankets, quick in, quick out, but the bark hit him like a sniper's shot, sharp, distinct, familiar in a way that clawed through 4 years of silence. He turned, heart pounding, and stared into the eyes of a German shepherd behind rusted cage bars. The dog didn't move, but his eyes burned with a question Jake never thought he'd hear again. "You remember me? Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing." The afternoon sunlight in Colorado Springs filtered through scattered clouds, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. It was early October, and the air was brisk, crisp with the promise of winter. Leaves danced along the sidewalk in red and amber waves as Jake Miller pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Pikes Peak Animal Rescue. Jake was a 34-year-old former Air Force sergeant with a squared jaw, a broad back, and a quiet demeanor that suggested both experience and caution. His military career had ended 4 years earlier after a mission in Syria left him with injuries, some visible, most not. He lived alone now, preferred silence, and spent much of his time helping local veteran charities. Today, he had loaded his old Ford truck with boxes of donated blankets, toys, and kibble for animals cared for by a veterans outreach initiative. The shelter was modest, a flat-roofed building painted in faded blue, surrounded by a wire fence. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and dog food. The receptionist nodded politely as Jake entered with the first box of supplies. He made no small talk, just headed toward the back room where donations were sorted. Then it happened. A single bark, sharp, precise, familiar in a way that struck Jake like a blow to the chest. He froze in place. Another bark followed, lower this time, tinged with urgency. Jake's heart began to race. He dropped the box onto a nearby bench and moved toward the sound, each step growing faster. He reached the kennel aisle and turned the corner. Third cage on the left. A large German shepherd stood behind the bars. He was thinner than Jake remembered, the fur around his flanks patchy, and a faint scar trailed down his right leg. But the posture, the way his ears tilted, the subtle motion of his tail, it was him, it had to be. The dog stared at Jake. "Unmoving," Echo Jake said softly, his voice cracking. The shepherd tilted his head. Then, with a low whine that swelled into a bark, he surged forward, pressing himself against the bars. Jake dropped to his knees. He reached a hand toward the kennel. The dog sniffed it once, then nuzzled into his palm with a sound that was almost a sob. Jake blinked hard. "I thought you were gone." He had been told Echo died in Syria during a night raid. There'd been an explosion. Jake had been medevaced out with shrapnel wounds and a fractured leg. The report was clear. Echo, his K9 partner, had perished in the blast, no body recovered, declared lost in action. But here he was. The door behind him opened. A woman in her early 40s entered, tall, lean, glasses perched on her head, wearing a faded hoodie that said Rescue Crew. Her name tag read Sarah. "Sir, please don't get too close to that one," she said cautiously. Well, we don't know much about him." Jake stood slowly, not taking his eyes off the dog. Where did he come from? Sarah hesitated. "He was found wandering near the old train yard last month. No chip, no tags. He was skittish at first, even aggressive. We haven't been able to identify him." Jake looked down at the shepherd again. "His name is Echo. He served with me overseas. I was told he died 4 years ago." Sarah stared at him, uncertain. "I know it sounds crazy." Jake continued, "But I'm telling you, that's my dog." She studied the scene in silence, the way the dog leaned into Jake's touch, the steady thump of his tail, the soft whines of recognition. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Let's get the paperwork started," she said, "and I'll open the cage." The sky over Colorado Springs was overcast the following morning, cloaking the streets in a dull gray mist that crept down from the mountains like a curtain of quiet unease. Jake Miller sat in the driver's seat of his truck. Echo curled on the passenger side, eyes wide but still, his chest rising and falling in slow, alert breaths. It had been a long night. Neither of them had slept much. Jake's home sat on the edge of town, a modest two-bedroom ranch-style house with a sagging porch and wind chimes that hadn't moved since spring. The front yard was overgrown, the grass patchy from dry seasons and neglect. Jake parked the truck in the driveway and opened the passenger door slowly. Echo didn't move at first. He looked at Jake, then at the house, then back again. "Come on, buddy," Jake murmured. "You're home." The dog stepped down cautiously, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. His gait was stiff, limping slightly on his rear left leg. The scar on his flank tugged with every motion. Jake noticed this for the first time and frowned. He opened the front door, and Echo padded inside, ears pivoting at every creak of the old floorboards. The house was quiet. A faded green couch faced a cold fireplace, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds and dust. Jake dropped his keys on the table and watched Echo circle the living room slowly, like he was reconciling pieces of memory with the present. The shepherd paused by the back door, then sat, his tail still, his posture straight. That's when Jake saw it. Echo flinched slightly at the sound of a passing helicopter overhead. The flinch wasn't dramatic, just a subtle drop in posture, a widening of the eyes. But it was there. Jake stepped closer. "You remember that sound, don't you?" Echo didn't move. Jake reached out and gently touched his fur. It was rougher than he remembered. As he brushed his hand down Echo's side, his fingers paused over something unusual, a thick, raised scar near the ribs, then another one just beneath the shoulder. Not old training scars, these were deeper, fresher, and far more violent. The door creaked open behind them. Jake, his sister, Emily Miller, stood in the entryway, clutching a canvas bag and a notepad. She was in her early 30s, slightly shorter than Jake, with sharp hazel eyes that missed nothing. Her dark hair was pinned up in a practical bun, and she wore a utility jacket over jeans stained with coffee and ink. Emily had the restless energy of someone always chasing a lead. She worked as an investigative journalist for a regional paper, though most of her best stories never made it to print. Too risky, too uncomfortable, too real. "You didn't answer my texts," she said, stepping inside, "and Sarah called me from the shelter, said you found something." Jake nodded toward Echo. "Someone." Emily's gaze shifted to the shepherd, who was still sitting silently. Her expression changed. "No way, is that—" "Echo." Jake nodded again. "Yeah, somehow." She crouched slowly. Echo didn't growl or shy away, but he didn't lean forward either. He simply stared. "I can't believe it." She said, "I thought he was dead, so did I." Emily stood, brushing dust off her knees. "Did they explain how he ended up at a rescue shelter?" Jake shook his head. "No chip, no records, nothing." Emily frowned, already thinking, "That doesn't make sense. Dogs in active service are always documented, even in combat zones. There are chain of custody protocols." Jake turned to her. "You ever heard of military dogs just vanishing?" She hesitated a few times, but they're rare, classified missions. usually written off as lost assets. Jake gestured to Echo. Well, he didn't vanish, he was hurt, and he survived, and no one told me. Emily's eyes narrowed. Let me dig. I've seen reports. Cases of other K-9s disappearing after deployment. Not just disappearing, erased, record scrubbed. No official discharge, no adoption papers. Jake's jaw clenched. Why would anyone do that? She pulled out her notepad. That's what I intend to find out. As Jake settled Echo into a bed of old blankets beside the fireplace. Emily worked quietly at the kitchen table, fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. The rain had begun, tapping softly against the windows. Echo didn't flinch this time, but he remained alert, head lifting at every sound. Then, just after dusk, the doorbell rang. Jake opened the door to find a man standing there, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and short-cropped silver hair. He wore a black jacket over a tactical vest and carried a clipboard. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. Jake didn't answer immediately. "Who's asking?" "Name's Travis Doyle. Private Security Logistics. I heard you picked up a dog from the shelter yesterday, German Shepherd." Jake's hand tightened on the doorframe. Why we're tracking a former asset, lost from a convoy incident, dangerous animal, needs to be returned to our holding facility. Jake stared at him. "He's not your asset, he's mine, Echo, K-9 unit from Syria, and he's not going anywhere." Travis gave a thin smile. "There's a lot of confusion in cases like these. Let's not make it complicated." Jake didn't blink. "Already is." Emily stepped behind Jake. Phone already raised. "You're not law enforcement. You're not military. You step 1 foot on this property without a warrant, and I'll have you charged with trespassing." Travis's expression didn't change, just doing my job. He turned and walked off into the mist. Jake closed the door slowly. Echo had appeared behind him, ears up, tail still, staring at the space where the man had stood. "What the hell was that?" Jake muttered. Emily answered. "Trouble. And if Echo's memory still works like it used to, he knows exactly who that was." Jake looked down at the shepherd. Echo didn't move, but he remembered. The Arizona sun hit differently, raw, unfiltered, and merciless. It baked the cracked earth and shimmered off the rusting chain-link fences that surrounded what was once a tactical training compound. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Sun-faded paint, a sagging gate, and watchtowers long out of use, but Jake Miller wasn't convinced. He had seen too many places like this during his service, places that pretended to be forgotten but weren't. He parked the truck under the sparse shade of a Joshua tree, and Echo jumped down with surprising ease. The German Shepherd was more alert now, his gait steady, tail held high. The limp from a week ago had diminished, and though the scars on his body remained, the fire in his eyes had returned. Jake saw it every time Echo snapped to attention at the slightest sound. Emily climbed out from the passenger side. She wore dessert-toned cargo pants, a breathable long-sleeve shirt, and mirrored aviator sunglasses. Her hair was tied back tightly, her notepad and camera strapped to a tactical sling. She wasn't trained military, but she moved like someone who knew how to stay alert. A week of digging through half-buried intel and old military acquaintances had led them here, a defunct Shadow Ridge facility buried outside Page. "Arizona. It's dead," Emily said, squinting at the chain over the gate. "Places like this don't die," Jake replied. Grabbing a bolt cutter from the truck bed, they hibernate. The chain snapped with a metallic twang. The gate creaked as they pushed it open. The interior was ghostly quiet. Old paper targets fluttered in the breeze. The control tower windows were cracked. The smell of dust and oil lingered in the air like stale breath. Echo led the way, nose to the ground. Each step calculated. They made their way to a low concrete structure labeled Logistics. Its door was locked, but Jake found a broken panel around the back and slipped them through. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old mildew. Filing cabinets stood like forgotten soldiers in neat rows. The only sound was Echo's breathing. Then Jake spotted it. A metal case shoved behind an overturned desk. He pulled it free and placed it on a table. Emily leaned over his shoulder as he cracked it open. Inside was a portable hard drive, some old photo IDs, and folders labeled only with numbers. Jake flipped through one unit. K972 Handler. Unlisted status. Reassigned Shadow Protocol. Emily sucked in a breath. These are off-books transfers. Look, none of them have final destinations listed, just status changes. Jake's hand stilled over a photo. A dog, unmistakably a German Shepherd, bore a vest marked SRK945. The eyes were hauntingly familiar. "It's Echo," he said, voice tight. Emily pulled the drive from the case and hooked it to her portable rig. The screen lit up with files, thousands of them, some redacted, others corrupted, but enough were intact to piece together the truth. Shadow Ridge didn't just retrain dogs, Emily said. They bought them, took them after missions, after bombings, when handlers were killed or injured. They erased them from the system and reprogrammed them like machines. Jake's fists clenched, and no one stopped them. No one knew. Jake turned away, pacing. The walls felt closer now, the air heavier. He could hear the sounds again, distant gunfire, shouted commands, the whine of a drone overhead. His chest tightened, the cold sweat returned, the base in Syria, the explosion, Echo going silent, the medevac, and then the long, suffocating silence. Emily noticed. "You okay?" Jake leaned against the wall, knuckles white. Sometimes it just comes back, doesn't ask permission. Echo walked over and pressed his head into Jake's thigh. It was subtle, but grounding. Jake inhaled deeply, then exhaled slower. "I'm good," he muttered. "Let's finish this." They copied the drive, sealed the case, and started photographing everything, as they worked. Echo perked up. Turning toward the hallway, his ears rose, body rigid. A sound echoed from beyond the door, a soft, metallic clatter, like boots on metal stairs. Jake drew his sidearm. Someone's here. They killed the lights and backed into the shadows. Echo crouched, tail flat, eyes forward. A figure passed by the doorframe, then stopped. Silence. Jake waited. Then, retreating footsteps. Whoever it was didn't force entry, Emily whispered. They're watching this place, still using it. Jake nodded grimly. Then they'll know we were here. They slipped out a side window and into the truck, speeding away before the sun dipped too low. They drove in silence for miles before Emily finally said, "We have to go public. This isn't just Echo. There are dozens, maybe hundreds, of dogs like him." Jake nodded slowly. "We will, but first, we make sure Echo's safe," as the shadows grew longer behind them. Echo curled in the back seat, head resting on his paws but eyes never closing. Whatever they had uncovered was only the beginning. The moon was half hidden behind drifting clouds over Colorado Springs that night, casting fragmented light through the trees that surrounded Jake Miller's home. A sharp wind picked up from the mountains, rattling the gutters and whistling through the aging fence posts. Inside, the house was dark, save for the soft glow of a desk lamp in the living room. Jake sat in a worn armchair, watching Echo sleep at the foot of the fireplace. Emily was at the kitchen table. her laptop screen lighting up her face as she transferred encrypted files from the drive they recovered in Arizona. For days now, they'd felt it, the creeping sensation of being watched. Jake had spotted a black SUV parked down the street 2 nights in a row, its engine running but lights off. Emily caught a man in a gray jacket lingering near the backyard gate, only for him to vanish the second she stepped outside. The tension thickened like fog. Emily glanced at Jake. "We should send everything to Collins." "Now," Jake nodded slowly. "Let's wait until morning. Once it's daylight, I'll make the call myself." Emily Miller had always been persistent. As a journalist, she never left a story incomplete, but this wasn't just a story. It was her brother's life, and the life of a dog that had been betrayed, used, and nearly lost forever. She looked out the window. The backyard was silent. At 2:13 a.m., the motion light by the garage clicked on. Jake sat upright. Echo, who had been dozing, sprang to his feet, tail straight, teeth bared. He moved to the front door like a shadow, low and ready. Jake grabbed his sidearm from the drawer, his breath steady. He nodded once at Emily. She understood. She'd prepared for this. 3 figures crept up the side of the house, dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured. One carried a pry bar, another had a shortwave radio. They moved with the calculated precision of professionals, military trained or close to it. The living room window shattered first. Echo lunged with a guttural snarl, leaping through the gap before Jake could speak. Screams rang out. One man tumbled backward onto the porch, his arm torn and bleeding. The second ducked under the frame just as Jake raised his weapon. Echo. Flank. The dog looped around through the hallway, appearing behind the intruder like a missile. Jake fired once into the ceiling. Drop it. The man froze, but the third assailant kicked in the back door, charging toward Emily. She stood behind the kitchen island, phone in one hand, a taser in the other. She triggered it. The man went down convulsing, howling, before Echo pounced to pin him in place. Jake moved quickly, securing the downed attackers with zip ties he kept stashed since deployment. The entire fight lasted 90 seconds. Outside, sirens began to echo in the distance. Emily had already hit send on the email to General Thomas Collins, her fingers flying. It contained the files, the photos, and the video she'd just recorded of the break-in. Jake glanced at her, chest heaving. "You got all that every second," she said, voice tight but steady. "They're done." The police arrived 4 minutes later, followed by a Department of Defense vehicle marked discreetly but unmistakably. A woman in uniform stepped out, a slender figure with short blonde hair, crisp fatigues, and a badge that read DoD Special Liaison. She introduced herself as Captain Marla Grayson. Her handshake was firm, her tone clipped. She assessed the scene and confirmed the arrested men had prior contractor ties to Shadow Ridge, though nothing was listed in public records. "They're ghosts," she said. "But not anymore, inside?" Jake sat on the porch with Echo beside him, watching the sun start to rise through the pines. He looked down at the German shepherd, whose vest was still buckled from the fight. The dog's side heaved gently, but his eyes remained sharp. "You were perfect, buddy," Jake whispered. "Just like always." Emily stepped outside, holding her phone. Collins replied. He said he's activating an internal investigation. He's still got friends up top. General Thomas Collins had been Jake's former commander during deployment, a thick-set man with a gravel voice and a reputation for integrity. Collins had retired the year Echo was declared dead. Emily had reached out to him as soon as the first suspicious data came in. Now, the wheels were turning. They'll try to bury it. Jake said. They might. Emily agreed, but they can't bury Echo, not anymore. Captain Grayson returned with her report. The detainees are being processed. Shadow Ridge will be placed under formal audit. Collins is moving fast. Jake looked at Echo. They came for him. Grayson nodded and failed. The sky over Washington. D.C. was an immaculate blue on the day Jake, Emily, and Echo arrived. Crisp sunlight bounced off the marble steps of the federal building, and security checkpoints hummed with quiet activity. Despite the seriousness of their mission, the air felt different, lighter, expectant. For the first time in months, the three of them walked together not toward a threat, but toward resolution. Jake wore a dark suit, his shoulders squared, the stiffness of military bearing still ingrained in his posture. His tie sat slightly crooked, but his expression was composed. He looked down at Echo, walking calmly beside him in a polished leather harness with a brass tag engraved. Echo, K-9 veteran, unit. 45. Echo's fur had grown back in patches, his limp barely noticeable now. His eyes were focused, his body relaxed. He was a dog that had found solid ground again. Emily followed closely, wearing a tailored navy dress beneath her trench coat. Her heels clicked confidently on the stone, and her leather-bound notebook, now filled with handwritten testimony and dates, never left her hand. Her hair, typically tied in a practical bun, was loosely pinned back today. She looked like someone who had not only survived the storm, but cataloged it inside the chamber. The atmosphere was solemn. A congressional hearing had been convened following the investigation into Shadow Ridge. At the center of it was Echo, whose silent presence served as living proof of a system gone wrong and a life that refused to be erased. General Thomas Collins sat at the witness table already. Upright, uniform flawless. He was in his early 60s, square-faced with silver hair and eyes that could turn a room silent, though technically retired. His word still carried weight at the Pentagon. He stood as Jake approached, offering a firm handshake. "Sergeant Miller," he said quietly. "It's good to see you both here." Jake nodded. "Thank you, sir. We're ready." The testimony was long, emotional. Collins spoke first, delivering the timeline with military precision. Emily followed, presenting the evidence collected, citing data from the Arizona facility, describing the night of the home invasion, and reading from emails exchanged with whistleblowers who had since come forward. Then came Jake. He stood in front of the microphone, hands steady, voice calm. He spoke not just of Echo's service, but of the betrayal, the silence, the scars that came home in more than one form. He finished by placing a photograph on the table, a picture of Echo in uniform, taken during their last mission in Syria. "There's a difference between a tool and a comrade," Jake said, his voice low but resolute. "One is replaceable, the other isn't." At the end, Echo was called forward. An aide named Meredith Hale, a woman in her late 20s with short auburn hair and a quiet demeanor, escorted the dog to the front. She wore a gray skirt suit and small silver earrings, and her tone with animals was impossibly gentle. She placed a medal on Echo's vest, an official citation recognizing his service and sacrifice. The room stood in applause. Outside the building, cameras flashed, reporters tried to swarm, but Emily raised a hand to shield her brother and Echo. They slipped through the side exit and into a waiting government van. 2 months later, Jake stood on a grassy hill in Boulder, Colorado. Behind him was a newly constructed wooden lodge, 2 floors, wide porch, wind chimes softly swaying in the breeze. A small sign read, "Echo Center, Therapy and Companionship for Veterans and K-9 Heroes." Inside, A dozen dogs moved comfortably across clean floors. Some had prosthetic limbs, others bore signs of past trauma, but all of them were safe and healing. Jake had spent the weeks after Washington renovating the facility with help from the VA and a handful of old friends from his unit. One of them, a wiry man named Red Henderson, had a sleeve of military tattoos and a prosthetic arm, but joked more than he talked. Red had a rescue mutt named Cricket, half beagle, half terrier, who never left his side and wore a crooked blue bandana. Together, they helped Jake turn the empty building into a haven. Emily visited often. Her book, The Forgotten Warriors, was hitting shelves nationwide. It told the full story of Echo, Shadow Ridge, and the hidden lives of America's war dogs. She was already fielding offers for interviews and documentaries, but she turned most of them down. Let the story speak. She'd said, "It's not about me," that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills. Jake sat on the porch. Echo lay beside him, head resting on his boot, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds. He was 11 now, his coat streaked with gray, but his body still strong, his eyes still intelligent. Jake reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You're home," he whispered. Echo didn't move. He didn't need to. They both knew. Sometimes, what seems lost forever can find its way home, not by logic, but by grace. Echo's return wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder that in the quiet corners of pain and waiting, miracles still happen. Whether you believe in fate, destiny, or the hand of God, there's no denying that something greater brought Jake and Echo back together, in a world filled with broken stories. This one found healing, through scars and silence, through danger and redemption. Their bond endured, and perhaps that's the lesson. Love does not forget. Loyalty does not fade, and when we least expect it. God sends reminders that we are not alone. So, if you're reading or watching this, and you're waiting for your own moment of light, don't give up. Sometimes, miracles wear fur and walk on 4 legs. Sometimes, they knock on the door after years of silence. Let this story touch your heart. If it did, help others see it too. Share this message with someone who needs hope. Comment below what this story means to you. Type Amen if you believe in second chances, loyalty, and God's unseen hands. Subscribe to stay connected to more stories that remind us of the goodness still in the world. May God bless and protect you and all those who wait in love,